融聚智慧，方能融创价值。融你我，融无限。江苏银行。
本节目由江苏银行冠名播出。
I'm Pascal Lamy. I'm a former Director General of the World Trade Organization, and you're watching News Time.
今年呢是中国加入世界贸易组织的第15年，在过去的15年间，中国已经发展成为世界第2大经济体，也是最大的货物贸易国，成为全球经济增长的主要引擎。而回顾当年，中国的入世之路可以说是并不平坦。世贸组织前总干事、现年69岁的帕斯卡拉米就曾经参与并且见证了中国入世的整个过程。他出生于法国，曾经就读于巴黎政治大学，毕业后呢进入法国政坛。1981年起，先后担任过法国的前经济和财政部长德罗尔的技术顾问，法国前总理穆鲁瓦的私人办公室副主任，欧盟委员会主席办公室主任等等职务。1999年到2004年期间，拉米曾经担任欧盟委员会的贸易委员，代表欧盟呢参与了中国入世的一系列多边贸易谈判。2005年至2013年期间，他连续2届出任世贸组织的总干事，在任期内致力于推行多边贸易体制，消除贸易壁垒，获得了国际社会的高度评价。就在不久前，拉米出席了在北京举行的第7届财新峰会，并接受了财新时间的专访。回顾中国入世的这15年，他又有着怎样的评价呢？
What's your expectation for China's role within the WTO currently?
China paid a lot to enter WTO, to subscribe the insurance policy it needed against protectionism. At the time, it was quite obvious for everybody that the main engine of China's growth would be exports. So China needed an insurance that its exports would not be hit by protectionism, which is why China accepted to pay a big price. And I think this is a problem. China, given its size and the responsibilities it has in world trade, should be more proactive in opening trade, starting with its own trade opening. And we know that in areas like services, for instance, the Chinese level of openness is below par and, in my view, below what is necessary to push domestic consumption in China.
In China, WTO has always been associated with globalization, and China is perhaps arguably the biggest beneficiary of globalization so far. Going forward, how can you persuade Chinese to really champion free trade rather than just talk the talk?
It's a very good question, and I'm personally convinced that China in the future will have to do more than it has done in recent times. As we've always known and said, China paid a lot to join, and since has not opened, and that's 15 years ago. 15 years is a long time. So if China wants to keep the benefit of this WTO protection, it has to reinvest in WTO. Hence, open more its market, not because WTO is asking for that, because at the end of the day, this is good for China. Remember at the time when China joined, and I remember discussions with Long Yong-tu, and the guy was not very popular in China. He was accused at the time of selling China to these Western long-nosers and, one more of these unequal treaties which the history of China has known. Retrospectively, it was a very good deal for China. So the notion that opening works has been demonstrated. Why not try a bit more?
For consumers, potentially from opening, there are a lot of gains.
I think, especially in the services market, which is less developed in China than it should be today, there is a lot of possible improvement for the Chinese consumer. And if Chinese authorities want to increase domestic consumption more, they have to offer a better deal to the Chinese consumer. A whole range of areas where more competition would bring more efficiency, hence better prices for the consumer.
Speaking of the trade, as we know, the trade growth has been slower than the GDP growth for several years. What are the causes for this?
You're correct. As compared to the past, if you compare the growth of trade in volumes to the growth of GDPs, which is in value addition, and please note that you compare volumes to added value, peers to apples. True, the ratio between the growth of trade measured in volume and the growth of GDPs measured in value addition has slowed. It is not protecting trade that leads to this reduction of this ratio. It has mostly to do with the fact that the world economy is on a rather slow path as compared to the past. It has to do with the fact that the big expansion of global supply chains, notably in Asia, that took place in the last 20 years is probably maturing, probably on the plateau. It has to do with the effective composition of world trade, depending on what you trade. And finally, there is quite a large China component. 20 years ago, China used to import a lot to add little value and re-export. Now, China is importing less, adding more value and re-exporting. And as China develops its economy, it increases the own value addition, because, increasing your economy is increasing your value addition. After all, the growth of 1 year is the sum of what you've done in improving your value addition. So, because of that, the import content of Chinese exports decreases, the domestic value addition increases, and this leads to less trade volumes as compared to GDP than in the past. So nothing worrying in this. I don't see any signal of trade regressing. The volumes of trade compared to GDP are simply growing less rapidly than in the past, but slowing growth is not reducing.
We know trade and investment are two engines of kind of globalization. WTO also extend to investment sometimes now. We see trade plummeting after crisis. Greenfield investment actually plummeting more. Only M&A is up, which is more like a reshuffling of wealth. Is that trend sustainable?
First, trade is not plummeting. The growth of trade is decelerating.
Yes.
Second, investment is a different field because you have no international proper regime for investment, which in my view is a problem. And I've always thought China should push more for having an international multilateral investment level regime. That would be, I think, in the interest of China. Now, the reason why we've had a constriction of financial flows stems from what happened during the financial crisis. The pre-crisis globalization was oiled with a lot of finance, and part of this finance was too risky. And it was right to re-regulate finance, hence increase, for instance, equity vis-à-vis what you can borrow or lend, and this has led to a constriction of financial flows. But nothing worrying. We know that if you increase prudential requirements, then financial flows will constrict. Is there a problem for financing investment today on this planet? No. If you have a good project worldwide, and I'm not looking at local condition, if you have a good project worldwide, you will find the necessary finance.
纵观2016年跌宕起伏的世界格局，从6月份的英国脱欧公投到11月的特朗普胜选美国总统，再到近期意大利修宪公投的失败，这些令人大跌眼镜的黑天鹅事件背后，表现出的是政府治理的失败，社会不平等的加剧，致使大批的西方民众利用手中的选票，对精英阶层一贯主张的政治正确和全球化说不。以反自由贸易、反市场和反全球化为核心的民粹主义在西方持续蔓延。
Brexit, Trump got elected, and TPP kind of US backing out of that. What's your observation in this past year?
Well, we've, as you said, seen unforeseen developments. Most people thought Brexit would not happen. Most people thought Trump would not be elected. Mm-hmm. Not many people thought TPP would come into force. So, but behind all this, there is, I think, some sort of populist surge, anti-globalization, anti-trade, coming from a part of the Western constituency. Mm-hmm. So the Western world is a part of the world, and a part of the Western world has resentment, discontent, frustration with the way globalization has worked for them, which in many ways is understandable. If you take the US, true, globalization, modernization, technology, automation, trade, and this is a big basket, has led part of the US middle class to feel that they were left aside. And that mostly stems from the weakness of the US social system. Mm-hmm. And this is the big difference with Europe. Not that we don't have populism in Europe also, mm-hmm. but less than we had in Europe, in the US. I don't think a Trump would be elected in Europe.
Globalization is, in fact, undergoing some resistance. How do you see this?
Yes, but not many. Mm-hmm. Globalization is today's face of capitalism. Mm-hmm. You cannot dissociate globalization from capitalism. Mm-hmm. And what we've known for a long time, notably since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, is that capitalism is extremely efficient, mm-hmm. but it is extremely unfair. It creates huge efficiencies because of efficiency of factors of production. Trade opening increases these efficiencies because you can locate your activity, your production of good or service where it is the most efficient, where it is the cheapest. This has a big impact on economic and social fabrics. Mm-hmm. It harms them, so there is a cost to that. Some win, some lose. Now, some countries are good at cushioning this impact of winners on losers. Take Nordic countries in the European Union, they have very sophisticated social systems. So if you lose your job because of trade opening, mm-hmm. you probably have a good unemployment system, you have retraining, you have relocation, the labor market is more flexible. If you're in the US, where the social safety net is very weak, you lose your job, you're on your own. And this explains also a difference of resentment, of discontent vis-à-vis globalization. Mm-hmm. The more your social system is sophisticated, mm-hmm. the less discontent you have with globalization.
Let's talk more about Europe right now situation. As we know, when the election in France and Germany, and also the Italians' referendum draw a lot of attention. What's your perspective for those three?
Well, I think we also have in Europe mm-hmm. part of this backlash against globalization, although because the European social systems are more sophisticated than the US one, at a lesser extent than in US. But we have populist threats. We have this in France, we have this in Germany. We had this in Great Britain with Brexit, although Brexit was not anti-trade. It was more anti-EU or anti-immigration mm-hmm. than anti-trade. So we also have that, and we have to be very careful mm-hmm. Because this is a worrying development. Now, my own sense is that this probably will be contained, but there is a risk. I don't think the risk is as high as it was in the US. Still, there is a risk.
How those kind of the risk going to affect the Chinese investment in Europe?
Well, it depends on which country you look at. I mean, if you take the UK, for instance, if at the end of the day the UK exits the European Union, and there still is quite a number of steps, procedures, processes, negotiations. So it will take a lot of time. Investing in UK as a gateway to the European internal market will not be available anymore. So the Chinese companies that were in London in order to access the EU internal market will lose this access with all likelihood. I mean, we're not certain of that, but that's the most probable assumption. For the rest, EU will have to increase its growth potential. For the moment, EU growth is on the path of 1.5% growth per year. This is too low. It will have to be increased through a variety of measures, and we roughly know what to do. So in the future, I think EU will grow at a higher pace than today. And if I'm a Chinese investor, I will put quite a bit of eggs in that basket. It remains a huge market, a rich market, the richest and the biggest on the planet for at least 10, 20 years to come.
So what kind of the position in Brexit should EU take?
The Brits have voted for Brexit. So they've decided they would move to a new house without having visited the new house. So the issue now is, what is the new house looking like? And nobody knows. Depends a lot on tough, complex, bumpy, maybe acrimonious negotiations that will determine the future regime of relationship of EU vis-à-vis UK and of UK vis-à-vis EU. Now, this is not only trade. It's also about fisheries. It's also about student exchange programs. It's also about security. It's also about police. It's also about intelligence. So there's a lot of connections. So brace for a long process, starting with this famous 2 years where terms of divorce have to be negotiated. The odds is that the British Prime Minister will trigger this clock March 2017, 2 years, March 2019, before the next European Parliament elections, and then a transition period for 5 years, and then a cruise period for the future. My own guess is that we are in for a 10-year negotiation.
Chinese attitude towards Europe is kind of ambivalent, sometimes thinking the social model is not sustainable. I was also at the official level, I heard from a British official saying back in the 2000s, Chinese really think EU is their counterbalance to America. So they send very good diplomats to Brussels. But after 4 or 5 years, they think the treaty change doesn't make too much difference. Power are still within European capitals. So do you think the problem in EU is problem of just execution or problem of inherent design? How do you think the EU going forward?
It's a very complex issue because EU integration will happen. None of these countries individually will be able to sustain this model in the future. So they know they have to do it together or they won't do it. It simply is very complex because this is not only about economic integration, it is also about political integration. Economic integration produces a part of political integration. A common currency takes you further in the direction of a political union, but political integration is a different ballgame. And it takes time, and it will take time, but I think the direction will not change. The speed might change, and we've slowed down European integration for the last 10 years, especially because of the economic and financial crisis. But the direction will not change. And I'm absolutely convinced that, for instance, if UK exits, no other country in the foreseeable future will exit the remaining EU 27.
Immigration is the biggest cause in Brexit. It's sort of hard to imagine you can allow such high level of freedom of moving of people without a political union. Do you think the European kind of social model and this really high level of movement possible?
I think the answer is yes, provided you make a distinction. Europeans, citizens, freely circulating within the European Union and external migration. This is different. And then if you look at people coming from the outside, you still have to make another distinction between those who are asylum seekers and who have the right to protection because they flee dictatorial regimes, they flee bombs. These people need humanitarian assistance, and those who are coming to the European Union because they seek a job, a sort of economic migrants. So, although long term, we know that given the demographic prospect of the European Union, where population is shrinking, we will need immigration. In no other place in history have population shrinking not being compensated by increase in immigration. This is not an easy process. It is culturally difficult. The further the people come from, the more the cultural adjustment is complex. But even in China, you know that. The differences between northern China and southern China are not always easy to accommodate. If a northern Chinese suddenly is transferred to Shanghai or Guangdong, he or she will probably find the life is difficult.
目前呢，美国和中国是全球第一和第二大的经济体，经济贸易和投资方面的联系非常的紧密。然而，随着全球贸易的发展进入停滞，贸易保护主义抬头，两国之间的贸易摩擦在不断的加剧。美国的新任总统特朗普在竞选期间指控中国操纵汇率，并且提出要对中国进口商品加收45%的关税，采取更多强硬的贸易政策。而近期呢，奥巴马总统以威胁国家安全为由，否决了中国福建红星投资基金收购德国半导体企业爱思强，更是将中美两国的贸易之争的话题再次推上了风口浪尖。
I think Barack Obama actually disapproved the Chinese acquisition of Extron, a German manufacturer. What do you think is the reason between disparity and what both sides can do to alleviate this situation?
There is a resistance to Chinese companies buying European or American companies. And that's a question of politics, of image. We know China will export more capital in the times to come. So Chinese outbound investment will grow and China will buy European or American companies. The problem, I think, seen from the US and EU is that the Chinese system for foreign companies to invest in China is less open than the US or the EU one. And many people in Europe, for instance, say, why could the Chinese buy a German company if a German company cannot buy a Chinese company? So the solution to this problem, and it is a problem, the solution to the problem is reciprocity. At the end of the day, the field has to be leveled. Chinese foreign investment must be as open as EU Chinese investment is. That's the right solution to this problem because it's a good thing if more European companies invest in China and if more Chinese companies invest in Europe. But the level playing field has to be there. And it's not the case for the moment. In China, there are still lots of restrictions. If you want to buy a company or establish a company, there are still lots of restrictions. It's an area where China should be more open.
We have President-elect Trump in the United States. The Sino-US bilateral investment treaty is probably not to make much progress in the first 2 years or in all of its presidency. Is there any chance for a China-Europe free trade zone or investment treaty going forward?
There is an ongoing negotiation with the European Union in China about investment. China had an investment negotiation with the US, an investment negotiation with the EU. If the US slow down, accelerate the EU. It's the best way to make sure the Americans will accelerate is to accelerate with the European Union. Put EU and US in competition. US was first, EU second. If EU is first, I can tell you America will be second. Yeah. Because if China and EU sign an investment treaty that gives a specific status, a favorable status to EU investors as compared to American investors will come, I can tell you. So the solution is very simple. If US slow down, accelerate with EU.